Hi, everyone, and welcome to Happy Not Satisfied. My name is Dan Morrison, and I am the host of Happy Not Satisfied and the founder of the company Happy Not Satisfied. I am here today with an incredibly special guest, someone that you have seen before on this podcast, and you will definitely be seeing again soon. My amazing, talented, beautiful wife, Ellie Morrison.
Thank you for the kind intro.
Absolutely. Ellie, how are you?
I'm well, thank you. How are you?
I'm doing great. We are here in the Studio O at the Pearl, recording definitely in the most maxed out fashion we have ever done before, and it's very exciting.
I will say it's extremely exciting. We have a very lights, camera, action in here. We're super excited to be here at Studio O, and it's where we live, so that's really
it was
convenient.
a 20-step commute. Yeah. I didn't mind that, and I also didn't have to pretend like I know what I'm doing with electronics and background screens and mics that I'm just making it up as I go.
In our apartment.
Very cool.
We're so excited to be here. And if, for anybody who needs to record a podcast in San Antonio, come check them out. Studio O here at the Pearl. So that's our plug for our friends at Onward Group.
Absolutely. So today I'm really excited because we're talking about a topic near and dear to both of our hearts, which is growth. Yeah. Very broad topic, but I think we're gonna hone in on it a little bit here. And growth is something that I think we've each experienced in our personal lives in a very profound way, but also in our relationship in almost beyond description ways. Yeah. And I think we're going to get into more of that, but I think it'll be interesting to start with a story from early on in our relationship that was a catalyst for growth in what we did. So do you want to tease it?
Yeah, I'll tease it. Okay. So essentially, we have been together for many years, and we met when we were very young, like 22, 23.
Which is not as young as my parents, who were high school sweethearts, by the way.
Very
but
sweet.
Yes, still young.
But we were, that time, the tumultuous 20s.
It's, yes, to say the least.
You're experimenting, you're doing all these crazy things with your career and whatever. You're growing as a human being. You're like,
and your brain is not fully developed. I think that's an important part of that.
But all that to say, we happened to meet when we were pretty young. And so we dated as usual, like casually. We were, once we started to cross this line into deciding, it had been a few years at this point, like, are we going to get serious about this? Or
was it? Yeah, I guess a few years.
Yeah, it was a few years. We were in a contentious conversation, I remember, about what
one of many
what the future looked like for us.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, are we going to commit to each other or are we going to break up? It's one of those, like, there is a fork in the road that we are approaching. Yeah. And what are we going to decide? And we have this dynamic about our relationship that I think is very much we want the same things, but we communicate very differently.
Even as evidenced in our conversation this morning, talking about
how we were going to
do this episode. It was like coming at it from completely
different angles.
But then at the end, it was like, wait, we're saying the same thing.
Yeah, of course.
I do want to add, just for some context to the time we're talking about, like our relationship stressed me out a little bit. And
both of us.
Yeah. And it was like, we came from such different backgrounds, and everything about our upbringing was the same but different. Obviously I'm from the Midwest, you're from Texas, you went to private school, I went to public school. It was just, there were so many things that were different. And so that caused stress because it was like, well, is this too different? And that was tough. And I remember like talking to my coworkers and not knowing what to do and like knowing there was something there, but is this the thing? And so that was my perspective, but you can continue.
Well, okay. So all that to say, we arrived at this exercise.
Yes.
That looking back, I'm like, I don't know how these 24, 25-year-old kids came up with this, but we were arguing about, okay, what do we want from the future? What does it look like? What would you do? And I think I was always pushing. I was like, okay, let's look 5 years down the road. Let's look 10 years down the road. And you were in the phase of nose to the grindstone. My priority is my career, building. But you were very much a one foot in front of the other person.
Which is funny because I feel like, if anything, that's almost flipped now.
Oh, yeah.
But
and I am a big picture person.
Yeah.
and a future person, and, you know, having these big ideas and wanting to strive for them. So we had to find a way to meet in the middle. And so we,
or not, we were
or not.
seeing what was
Yeah,
going
we
to
were gonna
happen.
see what was gonna happen.
Yeah.
And we decided, okay, we're gonna make a spreadsheet. It was like an Excel spreadsheet with, you know, all words, but it was basically what categories of life can we make in this spreadsheet, and do we see things the same way?
Yeah.
Because we're not speaking them the same way.
Right. No, exactly.
Yeah. And so we put everything out, like, where would you live? Like, cities you would live in, cities you wouldn't live in. Jobs you would have, jobs you wouldn't have.
Yeah. Or things about kids and just
Do you
bigger
want children?
picture things and existential almost kind of things,
It was
right?
an existential Excel.
Yes. And one of the only, like, I barely knew how to open Excel. I'm not sure how I even got through that. But I think an important part of the exercise too is that we answered the questions separately. So it wasn't like one of us did it and you could see it. We both did it separately, and then we compared notes. And I think what we realized looking at that was, wow, like the things that matter, we want all the same things. Yeah. And then the underlying theme of that was growth.
Yes.
And that we both wanted to grow as people. We wanted to, you know, bigger, better, whatever you want to call it. That was a takeaway from the whole thing. And I think that's what kept us together even when it was tough and we were so different and didn't know how to necessarily verbalize that or explain it to each other. Yeah. That was there and kept us going. And then seeing it like written out in this sort of silly looking back, but important exercise was kind of a pivotal moment in our relationship, I think. Yeah. And that sort of launched us into kind of coming back to the growth idea over and over again.
Well, and I think the way that I like to distill it is that from that point forward, we were committed to helping each other grow on the same team.
Yes,
you know?
absolutely.
And I think it was like, okay, we might come at things from a different angle.
And we still do.
And we still do.
Yeah.
Oh my God, we still do.
Yeah.
This morning, I mean, constantly.
But ultimately, that's good. We get better outcomes because we're not afraid to push back a little bit. You know, it's not just, maybe there's a little too much pushing back at times, but we get there.
He's so stubborn.
No.
But yeah, so I think, you know, looking backward at that exercise, it really set the stage for the rest of our relationship to this point. And we are now we find ourselves at another pivotal moment of, okay, we are now parents. How does this massive life shift look for us? And what does each of us need in this life shift? And I've been having, part of the reason why I wanted to specifically do this today with you is that I wanted to open this up to a larger conversation, because I've been having a lot of talks with other new mothers lately and, you know, friends and acquaintances in my life. I'm just not afraid to rip the Band-Aid off in a conversation and go straight here about, you know.
You've always been pretty good about that.
Oh yeah. But growth and fear, and how do we push through that, and how are we feeling, you know, as specifically talking to my friends who are also new mothers, like, where are you at? You know, are you feeling like you want to grow in this way or that way, or are you feeling more comfortable being fully home with your child? And, you know, is that possible for you? Just having all these types of conversations. And I think a big takeaway for me right now is that every month that has passed since Leo was born, and I've sort of been coming back to myself in some ways, a new me.
Yeah, 100%.
You know, in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
How do you make space for that?
Yeah.
How do you make space for your desires as a parent and also a professional or a creative or whatever, you know, separate from your parenting life? And I think that for me, every month has yielded just this new realization. It's like been taking like an onion and peeling back the layers of, I feel this now, I feel that now. Wow, I didn't expect to feel that. And how do we, in our relationship, committed to growing together, but also individually, how do we build ways to support each other to move forward in this new chapter?
I think I have several thoughts on many of the things that you said, but going back to what you were saying about supporting each other in each other's pursuit of growth, I also think that we've figured out how to grow in our support of the other person.
Yes.
So we, instead of just like, oh yeah, go for it. I think we try to be very attuned to like how we are saying things and how we're asking questions, at least because I know that it's a struggle for me to not just sort of go to where I think makes sense quickly and sort of push, I don't want to say push my agenda, but maybe a little bit. And I know that for you, that isn't what works, but it took time to figure that out, but being open to that. And I think then taking that idea of being open into the growth topic at large is so after you had Leo and things have been changing for you and maybe taking you to places you weren't expecting, you were open to what that meant, and you let that in, and you thought about it and you moved through it, as opposed to maybe just thinking, I should put that to the side and not think about it. And I think that's an important and difficult step.
And it wasn't easy, because I feel that throughout all of that and getting those signals, there was a big dismantling that had to occur.
What do you mean? What was dismantled?
Of the path I thought I was on.
Yeah. Or the path that you thought you should be on, or that you thought other people thought you should be on?
Yes.
Yeah.
And that has always been, like a permeating theme throughout the growth of the past 12 years. Is that they're at these stages of life that seem like the check the box stage.
Right.
Buy a house, have a child, have a dog, blah, 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 whatever.
Which we have done all three of those things, but in kind of not the most traditional of routes for some of them.
I think it's very difficult to really be connected with your intuition during those times and drown out the noise, because there is a lot of noise. It's constant noise. It's whether it's Instagram or it's social life or it's the city you're living in or whatever your influences are. It can be very confusing, and I work every day to not let some of that impact the choices that I'm being told from my intuition to make.
And as someone that obviously has watched you through that, like that's a huge area of growth, because I think it was more difficult to not be influenced by that, even as recently as months, or if not a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
And it seems like, honestly, becoming a mother and finding the strength through that has made you more convicted in yourself as your own person and what you want your path to look like, and not what it should look like according to the world or social media.
Yes, I do feel that. And I feel almost like, I had to become two separate entities within myself.
I can't believe you're not making a ridiculous Gemini horoscope.
Oh my God, it is
parallel,
Gemini.
Knowing you.
But this is different. This is different than the typical Gemini thing that I always say.
Yeah.
Because like my real Gemini is, like in a professional sense.
I didn't mean us to take us down this
No,
rabbit
in my
hole.
professional sense, I reckon with the inner battle constantly. It's like, are you Kelly Ripa or are you Anna Wintour? I mean, like those are the two.
Are those your choices? Those are pretty good.
Those are right.
All right, I like it.
But that's just on the professional side. But on the personal side, it has really been like I feel almost that having a child, you almost live separately from yourself in order to be a mother. And that's a separate mental thing for me. It's a separate mental and emotional compartment than the other part of myself. I don't know if that's rare or if it's what other women feel.
It's your experience.
It's my experience.
Yeah.
And so I realized that in taking care of Leo and being a mother and being very present in that experience is separate from the needs and wants that I evolved into with this other part of me that is professional growth.
Yeah, that's interesting.
But
I would wonder
one
the different
supports the other.
experiences of other people, because I bet some feel that and some don't.
Yeah, exactly. And I grew up in a family where, my mother was primarily with us for the first 12, 15 years.
Yeah.
And that was my example. And then, her mother as well, my grandmother on that side. But then I had other matriarchal figures in my family tree on my father's side that were operating businesses when their children were born. And so it's an interesting thing that's always present in my mind right now about how do I build a life where all of the different experiences and different parts of growth can happen simultaneously. And I'm interested to see this next chapter, how it unfolds, because I am working up toward going back to more full-time work,
Which I think that's another example of being open to changes in how you feel about things, because I think yourself maybe a year ago would not have guessed that that's what you were wanting to do, but it's very much now, it seems, where you're wanting to live, and you were open to that. You were able to let that in.
Mm-hmm. I mean, at 3 months postpartum, even, I thought, I'm going to be home now, because we were in a different city. It was like, this felt right. By 6 months, it didn't feel right.
Yeah.
And it's a process. And I think bringing it back to what I've been talking a lot about with other, particularly women, who are in my circle, is I think it's okay to accept the fact that you are in a growth pattern or a growth period, and that might not look perfectly packaged to the outside world. I think so many times we are afraid to do the growing because it's messy. Mm-hmm. And that looks like something that could be judged from the outside. We moved to LA, now we're back. You did grad school. I was doing a remote job for 2 years. Then I was doing freelance instead of full-time. And now it's all these different factors that have led us to this point. But I think I try and talk very openly with my peers about it, because I think we have to give ourselves permission in an age where everything is so perfectly packaged on Instagram, that might not be the case in your life. And that might not be how you achieve the growth that you're wanting for yourself when you look 10, 15 years in the future.
Yeah. And I like to always say, give yourself permission to feel joy. But I think as you were talking, you can apply that to give yourself permission to grow.
Yeah.
And I think everyone would say, yes, I want to grow. But then when it comes to what that may mean and what that might look like to other people, it becomes a lot more difficult in practice, because we've had to make decisions that were not easy, and that we talk about this, like zigging when other people zag, and not to say, let's just do that to do that. But there are times in some of the decisions we've made in our lives that were very almost opposite to what a quote unquote traditional decision would be. When we've made those decisions, they ended up being some of the best that we've made, And our path and our growth and all of it, to me, I don't think has been linear. But if you zoom out, I think when you connect the dots, it does have a very nice upward trajectory. And I don't mean that in terms of like making money or anything like that. I mean literally like my fulfillment and happiness in our relationship now as a father, in career, in relationships with friends. All of that has improved, and because of these decisions that we've made to grow in spite of what it could look like or could feel like. And like you said, growth is messy, right? And just to like recap a little further, like even just our last few years, I was in a very stable job that, my dad did the same job, high school band director, for 35 years. And that's kind of a career thing. And that's what a lot of people do. And I loved it. And I'm so glad to have lived in that. And I knew that there was a next step for me. I just could feel it. And I went back to school at, an age where most people are pretty much done with school. I was like 33 going into school again. And yes, like when you get your business degree, people are older, but many not as old as I was. And part of that decision was literally packing up our stuff and driving across the country to live in literally 380 square foot studio, beautiful apartment, GLB Properties. Shout out to Ivana,
and
amazing.
If you're looking for an apartment in LA, GLB Properties is the best.
But we shared a closet with all of our stuff. God. That was. It was
one.
This place was not meant for two people to live in, right? No. And we knew that going in. And
you forgot the part that before we packed our stuff, we had to sell 90%.
Yeah. Oh, I did forget that. So we sold our stuff. Packed a U-Haul. Drove to California, lived in 380 square feet, had an amazing time. Zero regrets.
Such wonderful memories.
Built things and did a lot of stuff that's remaining to this day. But that alone, that decision alone, that was, I think, kind of zigging when other people might zag, right? And then once, well, we were in school, we had a baby. That wasn't necessarily part of the plan going in, but kind of became part of the plan as different events unfolded and stuff like that. And then I graduated, and as we approached that, we didn't know if we were going to stay in LA or we were going to go back to San Antonio. It's like, well, we just brought all our stuff out here. Like, maybe we should stay. But there were so many reasons that were pulling us back to San Antonio that made sense. And so we packed the truck again and drove it back to San Antonio. And, those are just, it was like a little annoying and difficult to do that. But ultimately, I'm so glad we made each of those decisions. And I can only imagine what maybe some people thought, like, these guys are crazy, right? But I'm so happy that we did all of it, and I wouldn't do it differently, And I think that's just the way our relationship has evolved and how we've thought about life is just to be open to what the next opportunity might be. And then if it makes sense to do it, find a way to make it work and not second guess it and not think, well, this isn't what a traditional view of XYZ relationship, family, career should look like, so I'm not going to do it. It's almost like, well, if this isn't traditional, maybe there's something to it, and let's give it a shot.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
The other thing, too, I will say is when it comes to moving or orienting ourselves to accept opportunity, I recently read or I saw a quote. I follow former chief content officer of Hearst, Joanna Coles, on Instagram. Highly recommend following her. I happened to meet her a couple of years ago at South by Southwest, and we had a moment where we geeked out over each other's jackets because she's a fellow maximalist. But she said something the other day that I found really inspiring. She basically said to the tune of, opportunities are not always glaring at you in the face. Sometimes it's just this quiet whisper, basically, that you say, okay, that's not what I thought I would maybe be doing. But she said some of her best opportunities in her career as she grew were working for companies she had never heard of, and you learn. Every opportunity is a new learning experience, obviously, but I think that we do that. We're open to certain things that, yes, they maybe come knocking or you have to seek them out to a certain degree. There's like a mix of the two, I think, that happen. Going back to your creating your own luck tagline. Yeah. It's kind of like this meeting point where you put out a ton of effort and you move yourself forward in a certain way, but then that whatever that meets might not be what you thought it was.
It probably won't be.
It probably won't be. And that's kind of a situation I find myself in right now with what I've ended up doing the past couple of years and where I'm evolving in that space with doing work with marketing.
I mean, not to interrupt, but I think that you're the exact example of what you're talking about, because people that know you who maybe don't know what you've been up to or are doing for work, and I tell them before I explain further, like, oh, she works for a bank, people are like in shock because you're creative. You know, you're an editor, you're a writer, you're a visionary. You had this magazine that you created that just like doesn't jive at first with what a bank is, but this specific situation was perfect for you. And I don't think in a million years you would have ever thought, I am going to seek out a job at a bank and then I'm going to get that job. Never. You know, it was being open to what the universe was presenting, not to get to whatever, but and leaning into that and finding that it was an incredible situation.
Yep. I mean, yes. And not only would I have never thought that I would be at a bank. I mean, that's just like, but in a structured situation ever again.
Sure. Yeah.
And it ended up revealing itself to me over the past 2.5 years of, you know, I was remote and I was flying back and forth while you were in school. And I was having every experience I would have, I would feel really good. It was like, this is healing. You know,
I was watching it happen. Yeah.
And because I had, you know, like a really raucous, tumultuous time in structured environments in my early 20s. Raucous. It was just.
We'll go with that.
I was not in alignment. Okay. And every single time I would have an opportunity to be in person in my role and experience something and stretch and do something new, it was like the alignment was there and I was energized and I was inspired. And so what it has kind of evolved into is like, it is really a fun, cool thing to be that creative person in a traditionally non-creative environment.
Sure.
And that's typically what, PR marketing brains are doing at corporations. But in this specific instance where I am, it's been really amazing because I've been so encouraged to like lean into that professional skill set that I have developed outside of the structured workplace for many years, carving my own path through committing to growth at times when it was very scary and when it was not a charted way to go at all. Who knows what people thought of me, when I was 26, 27, 28, 29, whatever, building all that stuff.
Yeah.
But it has led to this growth path now. And I was on a podcast recently, the Femme Forte podcast with Amanda. We were talking about like being open to accepting the fact that you never know what you're building when you're building it.
Absolutely. That's, I think, the whole takeaway.
And you have to allow yourself to build. You have to allow yourself to be out of balance in certain ways in order to be in alignment in other ways. And eventually, I think with each phase and each chapter, it gets a little more even for you being like, okay, I'm good.
That's, I'm so glad you said that. Several things in there that are, I think, really important to highlight, but the idea of not knowing necessarily the outcome while you're building, but continuing to build it and put work into it and find the joy in it through the journey and the growth. I think that requires a level of trust that is difficult for people, and I say people, myself included, to have, because if you don't know what the destination is, then it makes the journey feel like it could be scary. But if you trust that this is something that you feel is worthwhile to put your energy into, and that the opportunities will come, achievements are byproducts of the process,
there you
right?
go.
Yeah. That's where the magic happens. And I think both of us have definitely experienced that in very, very profound ways in our lives, in our relationship and in our work lives. But the other part of what you said that I think needs to be talked about more is this idea of balance, because I think it's an interesting thought, this whole work-life balance, whatever you want to call it. And I think it can get misconstrued. And I think it actually can create more stress if you're somebody that is wanting to build, or in whatever way, you're ambitious, you want to grow, any of those things. But then you're getting this constant message of like, you have to have work-life balance. And so then when you're maybe going a little bit extreme, if you want to say, into whatever endeavor you're talking about, maybe you start to feel like, well, I need to back off because I'm not balanced. But here's the thing. I think a lot of the people that are preaching balance or have found balance are more seasoned in life and have gotten to a place where they've earned, or whatever you want to call, being a little more balanced in the more traditional sense of the word. But I think that there have to be times where you're out of balance. And I actually think it's pretty rare to be truly balanced in life across relationship and wellness and career and all of those things. You can't spin every single one of those plates at the same level every day consistently. There's no way.
Yeah.
And I do think that creates stress. I have felt stress from that, thinking that I am not quite doing that. And instead, I think it's okay to know that you're in a building period with, say, your career, and you're putting a lot of time and energy into that. And maybe some other things aren't quite where they would be, or where you want them to be yet. But then as that progresses, the thing you're really digging into, eventually it starts to, you can back away from that a little bit and bring up some of the other stuff, as opposed to everything is an even percentage split. It could be 90, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2 sometimes with some of those buckets. But eventually maybe it becomes 20, 20, 20, 20, 20 down the road. And when I started thinking about it like that, it kind of actually freed me from thinking I needed to do something totally different, that it's okay to go way all in on something and get, and this will lead us into another thought, but like the maximum engagement idea as opposed to not necessarily maximum leisure, but maybe maximum balance, right?
Yeah. Yes, 100%. And I was just thinking about parenthood when you were talking.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Like,
I mean, when Leo was
oh
born,
my
there's no
God.
balance.
No,
It's like
absolutely
you
not.
are doing everything you have to keep your newborn alive.
I mean, you know the meme on Instagram where there's the little toddler girl and she's on the, I don't know if you've seen this, if it comes up in your feed. It comes up in mine all the time.
Our Instagrams look very different.
Very different, but she's on like the tilt-a-whirl or something.
Oh, yeah.
And she's, you know, like what you thought Disney was going to be like. And it's like, bah! Like she's just on this crazy ride where she's going on and it's hilarious. That's what parenthood has sent me on.
Yeah.
Like, I feel like, you know, and it's good because it completely shook everything.
It is
like,
good. And talk about maximum engagement, right?
Yes. And so I've been thinking a lot, you know, this morning in preparing for this, just in my own mind, I was thinking a lot about the beginning of your band directing career.
Yeah.
And how out of balance and crazy that felt. You lived it, but it also took me in with it because we were newly married. You know, we were engaged.
Oh,
we were
so
newly
like
married.
beginning of becoming the head director.
Head director.
Yeah,
sorry.
yeah.
And how out of balance that felt.
It was very out of balance.
However,
in every way. Yeah.
When I look back, that's a very fun time.
Yeah.
Because we were maximally engaged.
Yeah.
And you were, I mean, but I, as your support system, was also maximally engaged, as you know, aside from myself and my own needs. But I feel like there were a lot of needs asked of me from that role that you had, and I had to adjust to, you know, okay, how do I support him here? How do I support? How am I a visible leader aside from you in your world to show that I'm supporting? But I also had my own life and my own things that I was pursuing and building and all of it. And it was just such every minute was full during those years.
That's the thing. And I feel like if people are being honest with themselves, probably when you get to the end of a day and it was so busy and like you said, every minute was filled and you've like earned lying down in your bed, those days feel amazing, you know? And it was a lot of that for sure back then. But first of all, I owe everything in my life not related to family to those years. And I was totally out of balance, but I wouldn't trade that for anything, you know? And it was incredible and it was stressful and it was highs and lows and crazy and little sleep and all of that. But man, was that maximum engagement and was that an incredible time that I'm so proud of it. You know, when you can live through that stuff and come out the other end and have done it, it evokes a massive sense of pride. And that's something that as humans, I think we really yearn for and need. And just to talk a little more and give some context to, because we've been talking about this maximum engagement thing, the idea that being maximally, is that a word?
That's what I'm saying.
Okay, cool.
I made it up.
Engaged over either thinking that we're striving for finding leisure time. I think it's one of those things that feels like we just want to earn the right to be able to do nothing. And then when we do nothing, it stresses us out.
Yep.
At least me. And I think you can relate to that too. Not to say that there are times, I will say for me, maybe not many times, but for some people, times where just doing nothing does feel pretty good. But on the whole, the engagement is what gives us fulfillment. And there's, I mean, I remember I saw this study and it talked about how people they followed a bunch of people, and I can't remember exactly how they got these metrics or whatever, but it was people who were doing tasks that they were fully engaged in, even if they were unpleasant tasks, reported being happier than people that were not active or not engaged. The engagement is what gave people fulfillment, not even the activity itself. So when there was meaning there, it made people happier and more on fire for life, as opposed to what we all think is what we're trying to maybe go for, which would be the leisure piece of it. So I think it's easy, very easy to lose sight of that and forget that. But I would encourage people, because I try to do this, when you've had maybe a hard day, a long day, a busy day, and you really like kind of check in with yourself, it's like, well, but do you feel sort of like proud and fulfilled from what you were able to do? Because those are the days that will really invigorate you over, just kind of having a day off.
Well, and bringing it into the parenthood discussion, the maximal engagement piece.
Yeah.
It is hard. It is, there are parts of this job and phase of life that are very challenging. And I think in an interesting, weird way, knowing and accepting that this was going to be reality, this is going to be reality for the next many years, gave me permission to accept that I wanted another path to growth also for myself.
Yeah.
Professionally, because it was like, okay, you're in it for, you're in trenches for a long time. So why not just also go into more trenches in the working world?
That's always how I've always going to be.
It's like but I mean, we say all this to say, like, it has to be in alignment with what you want and what
our
you
own
love.
Experiences are our own, it's not.
But I think it gave me permission to feel like, hey, yeah, I do have ambition still, and I want to go do this. And every minute of every day in the office is not going to be comfortable,
No, of course
It
not.
is going to be a nice break to like have a working space that's quiet.
Sure.
Because now, home is not going to be that for a long time. But I think there are going to be a lot of challenges and adjustment period of like being a working parent, and what does that look like, and how are we going to juggle all of that? But I think the discomfort of it all does not make the potential growth not worth it. If that's like a really weird double negative way of saying it. But
I get it.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think the growth period, like when we look back at this time of having young children and building things and whatever, down the road, we're going to think, oh, those were great years, where we were just in it and we had small children and also we're doing all these other things. For me, I think I am a type of person that tends to not love to be like strained and challenged all the time like you do. I do like to have that like mix of, I'm going to have downtime and listen to jazz and drink coffee. That's how I used to start all my mornings.
Which still though that can still be engaging,
Yes, absolutely. But that's not my reality anymore.
Right.
I'm very out of balance with what used to feel like a balanced day.
Yeah.
And so I'm just accepting that. And I'm accepting that mess. And it's going to be, one foot in front of the other, one day in front of the other type chapter. And it's not going to look perfect.
No.
As we're molding this Play-Doh of whatever the next chapter will become, it's not clean cut.
Yeah. No, it's not. And I think growth is something that when I read a book of someone that I really admire, or I'm paying attention to somebody like James Clear, who I just think is so good at making
his amazing emails.
Yeah, it's the only newsletter email that I read every week. Like I prioritize it, but he's so good at just very succinctly talking about these types of ideas. But I feel like everyone that has really pushed and is ambitious, and maybe they're an entrepreneur, they've started a business, they're an athlete, they're this, they're that, there's always talk about growth and how important it is to them. Like I think about Phil Knight, he founded Nike. He's got this great book, Shoe Dog, and he talks about it in there that his tagline was always grow or die, which is extreme. But I mean, I think mostly the die part is like, or the business will die. Right, that's how I kind of interpreted it. But the thing is, for whatever reason, it doesn't seem possible to stay the same. Like that's just not the nature of the universe. If everything is in motion in one way or the other.
Right.
So you're either growing and improving and bettering yourself and society and the people around you, or you're probably going in the other direction.
You're regressing.
You're regressing. That's the word I was looking for. And the thing about the regressing part is it's, I don't know, like kind of insidious in a way, because I don't think that you often notice it happening. It just stacks on little by little. You think that you're coasting, you like where you are, and you're going to stay the same, but it's just, that's like against the rules of how life works. And I mean, I didn't make the rules, but I've come to find that that's so true, that you either are growing or, like you said, regressing. And I think, again, when you can accept that and own that and realize that, and you lean into the growth, then you start to find more engagement and more meaning and more purpose. And you don't wonder why you feel like your wheels are spinning, or I'm not where I want to be, or my relationships I have fallen to the wayside, or I've gained weight and I don't know how this happened, or whatever it might be. The maintenance of it all is kind of a myth, in my opinion. And I think that we've been trying to own that as individuals, but also in our relationship, and certainly as parents, and applying, bringing it full circle. All this does kind of tie into this happy, not satisfied idea. If it's finding joy in the process of growth, well, we're talking about growth today, right? And that's kind of where it all comes from. And I think some big takeaways would be, growth is messy, growth is hard, and you always hear growth happens outside your comfort zone, right? So again, if you're in your comfort zone, you're probably regressing, and you just don't even realize it while it's happening. Yep. So I think I'm talking about these things not as an expert, but as somebody that has fallen for sort of this line in my life, where I think I can stay in my comfort zone and just chill and things are good. And then you look back over the last few months, year, whatever, and it's like, well, I went backwards.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And then, the other takeaways are, you yourself have these growth needs, but how do you support, if you're in a relationship, how do you support your partner through that growth, and growing in your support of each other, in addition to each person growing on their own?
Yeah.
How do you build a healthy approach to that? And how are you constantly talking about it? And how are you constantly evolving and committing to growing?
Yeah. And then also, like, doing it in a way that's not pressure intense.
Yes.
Because I want you to grow, but if I just pound that on you, that's not going to end well. And nope. I know that. But so then it's a nuanced idea of how you find growth within yourself and help your partner grow, help your family grow. And the next step of that is, like, that we don't really know yet, is how can we approach this with Leo in a way that is productive, not overbearing, but at the same time pushing him in positive ways. Seems challenging. Yeah. Seems challenging. So we'll find out, and we'll report back as we go through it. But I think it's important too. I'm not trying to say that it should just be over the top intensity growth at all costs.
No.
That's not well, sometimes for me personally, I'm a little bit extreme, and like, I kind of like that.
A little bit.
But I'm not saying that I don't mean that should be your approach to life. No. I just think that having an awareness of this and always finding ways to make incremental improvements. And you hear, like, if you get 1% better each day and you look back over a year, you've gotten not just 365% better, but it's compounding interest. So it's crazy how that can happen. That's what I'm talking about with all this.
Well, the other thing, the last piece of it that we didn't go into, but is always something that we talk about, is how wellness supports all of this.
Oh yeah. Well, honestly, I think that would be a good one to dive into for an entire episode. Yeah. But just from a macro perspective, I am not sure. We would definitely not be sitting here doing this right now if we hadn't each had our own sort of wellness awakenings. Nope. And I don't know, we could probably go further than that in terms of our relationship at large. I feel like we owe so much of the relationship we've developed to our own individual, like, kind of reckoning, at least it was for me.
Oh, absolutely.
Of wellness and what that means.
Because it allows you to listen to that voice. That is the number one thing for me.
You talk about getting rid of the noise. You're getting rid of the inflammation. You're getting rid of some of the negative thoughts through taking care of yourself.
Yep. And for me, the changes in mood, the sudden spikes, the sudden crashes, ability to now focus with clarity. I mean, all these things, these are big topics we're talking about, but these big topics are addressed on a day-to-day through the micro decisions
Yes.
that you are making. It's like, what is the next decision in front of me? Am I going to choose future me, or am I going to choose?
I was going to say, making decisions that your future self would be happy with and proud of. That's been massive for me. I mean, I do that every single day.
And especially leading others, when you are leading others. And I would argue the way we approach our relationship is with a leadership. We are each leaders of ourselves, but also within our relationship with each other, and then of course our son. You know, and
parenting is the ultimate leadership task.
And then professionally, like you lead, I lead. It's just how you the stage you set for yourself and your ability to perform at a level that feels clear. It's like that clarity allows you to listen to all the other signals that you're being given about where to take your next steps, where to take your next moves, how to arrange your life in a way that feels good as opposed to feeling icky all the time.
It's true. Yeah.
So that's the final takeaway, I think, that I would offer.
All right. Well, I think there's a lot of good ones here. Growth is messy. Zig when others zag when appropriate. Mm-hmm. It's been a great conversation, and I'm sure we'll be hopefully back in here doing this again sometime soon.
Absolutely.
I guess we can tell people where to find our stuff.
Yeah. Obviously, happynotsatisfied.com. You can find
revamped website, by the way, thanks to the amazing Ellie. Check it out.
And then at happy.notsatisfied on Instagram. And
your do you want your personal?
Oh, sure. My personal is at Eleanora Morrison. And you're at Daniel D. Morrison.
Yes. And if you're interested, I'm doing more and more speaking to schools and corporations and all those kind of things. And there's places on the website where you can inquire. So I'd love to connect if that interests anybody. But I'm thinking this may be turning into a co-host situation here. So stay tuned, and thanks for checking out the episode. Make sure to rate and review on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, all that. We'd really appreciate it. And we'll catch you soon. Thanks.